Hey everybody, this is a video for Math 210, Business Calculus, and I'm going to do an example from the Lumen Homework section 1.3, Intro to Excel. And so let's take a look at this problem here. It says that we have a company that is able to sell a total of D of P items. So remember we talked about the D of P function is the demand function. It's the quantity of items that we're able to sell or that customers demand. So that's another way to say the quantity of items. And it depends on price. So I input price and I output the demand or the quantity of items that people want to buy or that I'm able to sell. And we have our demand function here. And then it asks us to find the revenue function. Notice that my input to the revenue function is also P, price per item in dollars. So for revenue, I input price and I'm going to get an output of revenue in dollars sold. So then it says I want to create an input-output table and a graph for the revenue function in Excel. So if we're given more than one function, like so for instance, we were given the demand function here, I want to have all of the functions that I'm interested in my input-output table. Let's just read on a little bit more here. So it says within Excel, I want to create that input-output table and graph, and it says the graph that I create should span a set of p-values which allows me to clearly see any x-intercept and that there are any y-intercept and two x-intercepts and a peak maximum point. So that's giving me a clue here. All right, if you're not seeing those things, then you need to rethink what your inputs are or your prices are. So let's take a look here. So initially I started off with my price and I just have price going from 0 all the way down to $50 down here. So it keeps going. And you don't always know. I'm not going to always tell you what to span your inputs. You got to think about what kind of function do you have and any hints that are given in the problem and then make adjustments. So don't be afraid to, change the interval for your inputs so that you get a view of the function that makes sense. And so here what I did is I put my demand function in, right? Demand is negative 3.27 times P, which is in the input column in A2 plus 7274. Okay, right here. I just input that. And then remember revenue is just price per item. That's what I have in cell A2, my price, and demand is my quantity. So I can write my revenue function here as price times quantity. All right, so what I've also done over here though, is I've done it algebraically, right? Revenue is price times quantity. So P times the D of P function. So here's P, price, and then here's D of P. And if I expand that out or distribute that P, that's going to result in negative 3.27 P squared plus 7274 P. And then I can also just say plus 0 because notice that this is a quadratic function. I have that P squared there. It has a negative coefficient in front of the P squared, which means that it is going to open down. I also know that my y-intercept is going to be this 0, okay? Remember I gave you this handout here when I have a quadratic function, which is a second degree polynomial. It's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And that tells me, the square term tells me it's a polynomial. Because that coefficient in front of the square term is negative, it means that it's going to be opening down. It means it's always going to be concave down. It means that I'm going to have a maximum high point, all right, at the vertex. And then I can either have one y-intercept. I always have one y-intercept, but then I can either have 1, 2, or 0 x-intercepts. Well, my problem over here already told me that I'm going to have 2 x-intercepts. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have. So when I graph this function, when I graph this function right here with a price that only goes to 50, notice it kind of looks like a linear function there. So that should be sort of a red flag for me. Once I check my formula and I know that I calculated my revenue function properly, I'm going to go back here where it said make sure that my p-values span so that I can clearly see all these key characteristics. So I need to change my inputs. So let's do this again. Now I'm going to go from, let me make these increments of $10. Okay, so if I go $0 to $10, and then let me update my price. If I copy this down, then I'm going to go from a price of $0 to a price of $500. Let's see what that does to my graph. Well, now I start to see a little bit, I see it curving. It doesn't look linear anymore. But because I can't see two x-intercepts, I only see one x-intercept and a y-intercept, and I don't see a peak yet, I need to change my inputs again. I need to change my prices. So this time I'm going to go in increments of, let's say, $100. All right, let's see what happens if I change my price to go from $0 all the way down to, that would be $5,000. Now notice I see a starting point here, an x-intercept and a y-intercept. I have a peak, and then I have another x-intercept. But down here, I really don't need all that extra price, because when I start getting to prices, right, at $2,300, I have a revenue of negative, right? Or I have a loss. So I really wouldn't price my items in the real world that high, because I would be having a loss. So I'm just going to get rid of the rest of these inputs and outputs, because that is giving me a view of my table, right? So now look at, I have a much better view of my revenue function here. I can clearly see that I have an X and a Y intercept here, right? I have a peak here, and then I have another x-intercept here. So let's continue on with the problem now. It says find the vertical intercept. Find the vertical intercept. So that means, where does it go through my vertical axis, or what is my y-intercept? So when I have a y-intercept, it means, what is the y value when x equals 0? And if I write it as an ordered pair, that would be, if I have an x value 0 or an input 0, what's the y value? So that's telling me evaluate. It's telling me that put 0 in my input, or check to see if I have that in my table. Well, I do. Okay, so price equals 0. That is where I'm going to have my y-intercept for the revenue function. Notice I have graphed here, actually. I just graphed my revenue function here. Okay, I graphed P as my input and R as my output. And I used that select non-adjacent columns here. So I didn't graph the demand function. Okay, so it wants me to highlight in blue my intercept. So I'm going to come here to the Home tab, and let me make this bigger. I'm going to say when, right here, I'm going to make that blue, and then I'm going to make that blue. So that's my y-intercept. When x equals 0, y equals 0. So when price equals 0, my revenue is also equal to 0. So that's how I'm going to interpret that. All right, we'll do that in a second. So the second part says, find the horizontal intercepts. Remember, up here, I'm told that there are two of them. Horizontal intercepts mean the x-intercepts. And it's asking me for this intercept on the left side versus the right side. So physically, I'm just looking at my graph here. So if I look at my graph here, here's the left intercept, here's the right intercept. That's all it's asking me physically, to look at the drawing. Where is my intercept, my x-intercept, on the left-hand side versus the right-hand side of the graph? All right, so let's do that then. Let's take a look at that. So horizontal intercept, my x-axis is my horizontal axis. So that means what is the x value when y equals 0? All right, so y is my output. So I'm solving, right? I want to have f of x equal 0. So I want my y value or my output value or my revenue to equal 0. So I'm going to look at so that's telling me I want to use solver. Well, so I see here, so I'm going to scan my table and see if first I'm going to see if I see 0 in my table. So I actually do, right? Right here, I already have a revenue of 0. So that is my left intercept. So notice it's both the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Okay? So this one is already done. So on the right side, this point here, I can kind of use my graph to help me look where I want to look in the table. Somewhere between a price of 2,000 and 2,500 is where I'm going to get a y value of 0. So let's look down here, right? I can see that my revenue values or my output values are getting bigger, 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 bigger. Keep getting bigger. Okay, and now it's getting smaller, 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 smaller. Okay, and here at a price of $2,200, I have a revenue of $176,000. Once I get to $2,300, then I'm at a loss. So somewhere between a price of $2,200 and $2,300, my revenue went from positive to negative. So that means that somewhere between there, I'm going to have a 0 revenue. So I want to force this cell. I'm going to pick the cell closest to 0. So I'm going to actually pick this negative cell, and I'm going to do data solver, and I want to force cell C25 right up here to equal a value of 0. And where do I want to put the result? Remember, I'm solving for the price that I need to charge so that I have I go through the x-axis so that I have 0 revenue. And where do I want to put it? So I want to put it right back here. I need to uncheck that box, and I need to solve. Okay. So this is pretty close to 0. And because that number was so much further away from 0, it's not exactly equal to 0 here. Let's actually try something a little bit different here. So let's try 2, 2, 2, 4. All right, let's try solver again. So let's do solver. And again, I want to force that cell to equal 0. So see, because my output value was actually closer to 0, it gave me a more precise result. So the further away that cell is from 0, Excel is trying to do the calculation and get really close to 0, but the further it is away from 0, it's not as good as approximating. All right, so now I'm going to, this looks better to me. I'm going to highlight that, and I just want to format that. I don't like it when it looks like it's in scientific notation, and good. So that makes sense here. That looks much better. All right, so let's see. My vertical intercept is at 0, 0, right here. And then my horizontal intercepts, I have more than one. So I have a horizontal intercept at 0, 0. And then I have another horizontal intercept at, let's make that shaded as well. Right here. Okay, so I have another horizontal intercept at 2224.46, comma 0. Okay, I'm going to pull this down here. And then it wants me to interpret these things. And so remember, if you put sort of words to the function notation, sometimes that can be helpful. So this says, right, when I input price to my demand function, I'm going to get the quantity of items sold. When I input price to my revenue function, I'm going to get revenue earned in dollars. So this last part wants me to interpret, let me slide this, it says finish this. When I charge blank dollars per item, the price will be so high that they will be unable to sell any items. And that will produce a revenue of blank dollars. All right, so that is my second x-intercept. When I charge a price, right, see here, as price goes up, my revenue is going up, 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 until I get to somewhere around $1,100. Then after that, it's going down, 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 all the way to, if I price my items too high, I'm going to have a revenue of $0. All right. So if I interpret that second point, it says, if I charge $2,224.46 per item, I will have priced it so high that I have zero revenue. So notice here that I also have zero quantity, which makes sense. If I price it so high, zero people are going to want to buy it, which results in a revenue of zero. Okay, so let's see what the next one says. Contextually, it says, when they give the items away for free, they will be able to sell how many items? And that will create a total revenue of blank dollars. So if I give items away for free, that means I'm talking about the price. The price would be $0. So it gave me the input here, gave me the input of $0, and then I want to determine how many items will I be able to sell, and then what the revenue is. So here is a price of $0. When I price my item at $0, here I have my quantity of items. All right, so people would want 7,274 items, and that would result in a total revenue of $0. So if I give away the items, right, I don't have any revenue, but I have a lot of demand. A lot of people are going to want to buy, well, not buy, because they want to take them for free. So that next part is really asking me about the demand function. And that's why you always want to, graph every single function that you have. So this says D of 0 is equal to 72, 74 when I give away my items, aka price equals 0, then 72, 74 people will want to buy them. And I'm going to put that in quotes because they're not really buying them. You're giving them to the customers if you charge 0. And then I can also see that that would result obviously in a revenue of 0, because revenue is price times quantity.